Hello and welcome. I'm so pleased to be bringing you the latest series of A Human Conversations. This is the podcast that brings together the intersection of business, culture, and humanity and really dives into what that means. I'm Katriina, founder of a human agency or AHA, and I'm delighted to be diving headfirst into this conversation about leadership, respect, and that concept that we talk about a lot, which is being human at work. But I've got a very special person with me who knows a lot about that topic. And so this is the perfect way to kick off our new series. Jude-Martin, welcome.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here, and to be welcomed that way. Because I just don't see myself in that way at all.
I think we'll all discover soon exactly why conversations with you are
Mm.
magical. I find they take me into different places and my brain kind of travels the universe, which is wonderful. So we're talking about leading yourself first, but a much broader realm than that. But I know that's something that you really dive into. And then what I'd love people to understand, and of course for you to set the context yourself, but what I think is special is that your headline, 2025 bio would read something like leadership coach, PhD candidate, researcher, facilitator, OD specialist. But what that doesn't say is that before you started standing before Australia's biggest organisations, helping them to understand who they are, you actually spent many years in a monastic community learning about mindfulness and the inner workings of leadership. And it's that coming together of those two that I think is so unique and powerful. So
Mm.
um, perhaps I think over to you to really let you set the context. How do you go from silence and stillness to standing in boardrooms and stages and then talking so loudly about the topics you do after such a period of solitude in your life? So set the scene for how you get to be here today.
Ah, thank you, Katrina, first of all, for the wonderful introduction. And just what you mentioned that, how do you go from silence and stillness to the workplace, to the boardroom, to the workplace, to working in the corporate sector? As you were saying that, what came to mind was the fact that actually it didn't start from silence and stillness to the workplace. There was a period of in my journey. There was a period of just what kind of mental gymnastics, just the constancy of that going on.
Mm.
Not being able to turn off the voice, the critical voice, the inner critical voice in the head.
Hmm.
Um, my journey started there, and my journey started with trauma. Trauma made me realize that I had this voice I couldn't turn off, and that trauma was was the fact that I was uprooted from work. 'Cause I was born in Chelsea. I was born in London, and I was uprooted from Chelsea, London to Lagos, the chaos of Lagos, Nigeria, in the early 1980s. My parents told us as a family that we're going to Lagos on holiday. My parents are Nigerian. My dad's Nigerian. My dad's a traditional Nigerian man, and so we were all excited, and we went to Lagos. And then when we arrived Lagos, and you can imagine moving from, UK at the time to Nigeria for the first time. And I don't know if you've been to Africa, Katrina. Um,
No.
um, yeah, Africa is beautiful, but it takes getting used to.
Mm.
Uh, and so when you're an 80-year-old person and then you go to Africa for the first time, as I was with my brothers, and then told you're not coming back, you're here to stay, that was the beginning of trauma
How
for
old
me.
were you?
8.
And how old were you in that moment? Eight, and that happens to you.
Yeah. Um, and just to paint the picture a little bit further so you can understand the texture of the experience, um, one of the things that hit me was just the abject poverty in Lagos when I arrived. Just the
Mm,
abject, I call it abject poverty because that's what it is. You see people on the street living in corrugated iron sheets, in the heat and
mm,
in the dust, um, and just a
mm,
different landscape. So that was
mm,
my context, and then from there moving in straight into boarding school in the bushes of Nigeria, which is another story. My dad then took me to boarding school, and it was we drove for about 2.5 hours away from Lagos to another state, which was far away, far out. And that was my boarding school. I went to a boarding school. My father dropped me off, gave me a hug, got into his car, and drove off. And I stood there by myself, in shock, thinking, "What do I do now?" So that was really the start of my, when I look back, that was the start of my trauma and all the my inner dealings with that. That's where it started, and that's what drove me then into the solace of silence, which you mentioned.
mm.
Um, that's my journey.
And you use the word boarding school, which, in an Australian context, or you were born in London, in a London context, conjures up ideas of sandstone buildings and ivy and, you know, beauty. But this is not one of those boarding schools. This is in outside of Lagos. So this is very different, and you're a little boy.
That's correct. I'm a little boy. It's very different. Everything's different. And even though I look Nigerian, Nigerians can take one look at you and they go, "You're not from here." you know.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so I stood out like a sore thumb. In boarding school, and there were many pluses, but there were also many challenges that I faced in boarding school. And I guess those experiences, and people have their own unique stories. Everyone has their own unique stories of what I call pain and suffering. Everyone
mm,
has those, but that was mine. That was my context, and that
mm,
context,
mm,
um, and the subsequent mental emotional struggles that I noticed that I
mm,
dealt with as a young adult. That's what drove me, or that's what constituted my decision to going um, into a monastery at the age of
mm.
18, 17, 17. I went into a monastery and I lived in the monastery for 7 years in meditation, silence, and study, um,
Mm,
finding myself.
mm. Not the journey that most 17-year-old young men go through, but I'd imagine incredibly powerful. And as you said, a journey of finding yourself. So how does that bridge lead to you today? What happens on that journey?
Well, it's interesting because when you mentioned, this is what came to mind when you mentioned from this solace of silence to the workplace, and how do you bridge that gap?
Mm,
Actually, you know what they say? They say, um, and this is my leadership style, but they say, you can take the monk out of the monastery, but you never really take the monastery out of the monk. Yeah.
wow. Okay.
And so, even though I left the monastery, what, about 20 years ago, um, I have taken with me the practice of being
Mm,
silent inside into everything I do, including into the workplace.
mm,
I bring that with me into the workplace,
mm.
into the book.
That makes a lot of so much sense. And this phrase of leading yourself before you lead others resonates with me. Is that where that comes from? Because you've obviously spent a long time sitting with leading yourself before you've become a thought leader to others.
It comes from there, absolutely. But interestingly, that mantra, that phrase, really also is a phrase connected with emotional intelligence.
Mm,
And
mm,
as you know, Daniel Goleman, who is supposedly the father of emotional intelligence, in his book, Why EQ is More Important Than IQ, he has this famous definition of emotional intelligence specifically from a leadership perspective. And it goes like this. He says, you can't lead others unless you first learn to lead yourself. And
mm,
so
mm,
that really resonated with me as part of my as part of the research that I'm doing into the area of transformation and transformational leadership. It really resonated. That's really resonated with me because it really, in a way, in a very large way, signals my own personal mantra, leading self first, so as to
mm,
be able to lead others. You never really set out to lead
mm,
others, really. You don't go, I want to lead other people. No, you don't really do that.
mm.
The great leaders that we know
Yep.
start with here first.
Mm. Or they never even ask to lead other people. It's something that happens because of who they are. You don't, as you said, you don't go out saying, I want to lead others. Maybe some world leaders today arguably do, but the
Mm.
really influential people never said that. Um, you just mentioned your research and that small but enormous word transformation, which obviously in 2025 has got so much meaning and can be taken into so many places.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your work now and transformation and what is it really deep diving into? What are you exploring?
So, in a nutshell, the word transformation, as you mentioned, is being used in so many ways within a HR space, HR and business space. And transformational leadership itself is not a new concept. It's been around for a while, as
Mm,
you know. And it was introduced by a gentleman by the name of Bernard Bass in 1985. And he defines
mm,
transformational leadership as the ability of a person to inspire their followers, their teams, to aspire towards higher order
mm,
goals beyond
mm,
what they think they can achieve. Yeah, so they
mm,
inspire teams to do things that are literally beyond their imagination. And then he talks
mm,
about four different dimensions of what a transformational leader is, as in when you experience a person that has these qualities, this is what you will experience, is what Bass says. And we don't need to go into what those four dimensions are. They're pretty well known, unless you want me to. Um, my approach to transformation is the fact that Bass doesn't talk about how you become one.
mm, mm,
He talks about this is what you
mm,
see when you see a transformational leader. He doesn't talk about how do you actually become transformational.
mm,
And so the lens of my research is the lens of looking at responding to that question, how you become one, through the lens of lived experience.
mm, mm.
And what I did to get to the answer was I interviewed. Sorry, go on, Katrina.
No, no, it makes so much sense because where we started was that this is all about the inner work. So you are looking at the how, which is the inner work, whereas the four lenses that you mentioned before are what you see on the outside. So this is all
This is right.
so coming
Yes.
together, this whole story about the inside, the inner work, what's going on under the lid, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. What's going on under the lid is so. Yeah, that's absolutely right, and just the way you phrase that is very pertinent. And my angle is understanding the inner work that leaders do to
Mm,
become transformational. And so the way that I arrived at that is through interviewing 8 senior, highly emotionally intelligent leaders in Australian
Mm,
organizations in the Australian corporate sector. And the research that has come out from that is that they all experienced pain dealing with the challenges of emotional turbulence in the workplace, dealing with the challenges of internal tension in the workplace, dealing and managing that. So things like they all spoke about um, having to manage things like the imposter syndrome,
mhm, mhm.
having to manage things like fear of the unknown, fear of speaking up, not believing in themselves, um, which actually then made me to turn inward further myself to say, what's been my own experience of transformation? What's been my own experience of pain,
Mm,
rather? And I then realized for myself that my own inner journey of pain and suffering that we were speaking about as we started this conversation has in fact and how I have been coping with that is
mm,
in fact where transformation happens. Transformation happens in how I cope with the pain that
mm,
everyone's dealing with some kind of pain, right? Everyone. Um,
mm,
Everybody's
mm,
dealing with some kind of internal challenge. Um, and transformation says don't run away from that challenge, learn to cope with that challenge because it's in the
mm.
coping that the transforming occurs. That's my approach to transformation, and that's the research that I'm doing.
It's fascinating to me, Jude, the timing of this conversation because we're talking in November and it's Men's Mental Health Month. But what you've shared with us personally is those noises that we can hear in our head, you know, the imposter syndrome that you heard from some of your interviewees who are some of Australia's, you know, biggest senior leaders, and yet that stereotype of men as strong, fearless, tough. How do you reconcile those two?
Yeah, it's a facade, though, Katrina. You know, it's a facade. And the stereotype that men are born into, and the intrapersonal bias that has arisen out of that. But there's also something else. There's this energy that is contagious. The energy of bias and the energy of societal stereotypes about men being strong as being,
Mm,
the Goliath that never feels pain. Um, that's an energetic bias. It's an energy that
wow.
we
Okay.
actually that men embark by a process of what we call in emotional intelligence research, we call it emotion contagion. It's contagious. We're born into it and we suck
Yeah.
it into our very being
Mm,
without realizing that we're doing so. It's unconscious. And then we find
mm,
ourselves behaving in accord with men
mm,
don't cry, man up, be the man, and automatically what that means is that men should not be vulnerable.
mm,
It means that men should not pause. It means that men should not learn to stop and, using monastic language, sit with the self to
mm,
understand what is going on underneath the hood. What's
mm,
going on in organizational development language, as you know, we say what's going on underneath the skin.
mm,
Yeah, that's leadership right there. That's leadership. Leadership begins when we as men, this also includes women, but when we as men
mm,
make an intentional decision to step back,
Mm.
to go against the countercultural um, um, ideas that perpetuate that bias. Be
Mm.
man, be a man. We go against that with intention to actually understand what's going on in here. What's going on here?
Mm.
You know. And so when men can learn to be vulnerable, um, to understand what am I feeling emotionally, because we talk about men's mental health.
Mm.
Our mental health is intricately tied up with our emotional health,
Of course.
with our
Mm.
emotional well-being. And I'm really, this is a key point I think that you and I are pointing out that, and it's key coming out from this it's key coming out from this conversation that our mental health is intricately tied up with our emotional health, with our um, embodied health,
Mm.
and with our spiritual health, because they're all one thing. They're not separate things, they're interconnected. This was my experience,
Mm.
that actually it's the whole of me as a human being, the whole that makes me myself, that requires that I become vulnerable to address.
Mm. And tell me, in those conversations that you had during your research with the leaders, had they gone through that journey? Were they consciously aware that they had been in a place and they had had to come through it and be more now aware of that transformation? Or in the conversation with you, did they realize what happened with them? So did they consciously do it, or was it more that they reflected on that? And had they reached this place where they were sitting with this new awareness? And that's about 10 questions in one. But I'm just so fascinated to understand what you said just then and how that applies to the real life humans you've worked with.
Yeah, the leaders that constituted my research all expressed how the experience of
Mm.
pain
Mm.
and suffering, and what I'm calling pain and suffering is one's mental emotional state, mental emotional health. They all
Mm.
got to a point whereby having it to deal with that was what made them become intentional about dropping into themselves.
Mm.
Eventually
Yep.
going, I have to be vulnerable here. I have to be vulnerable
Mm.
to understand what's going on beneath my skin.
Mm. Vulnerable is such a important word. The other word that we tend to use when we talk about mental health is resilience.
Yes.
How do vulnerability and resilience sit next to each other? Because one, your brain can have this unconscious conjuring up of vulnerability being, here's my chest is open, come and see me at my most exposed, whereas resilience almost leads you to this toughness, just be resilient. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's that simple, is it? How do vulnerability and resilience sit side by side in your thinking?
Yeah. And I love that question. Um, do you know, now this might sound a bit counter, but I actually do not really like
Mm.
the word resilience.
Clear. Yep.
Because
Me
resilience,
too.
it gives this idea of, you bounce back and you just keep on going. You bounce back and you keep on going. What do you
Mm.
bounce back from? Is my
Mm.
question. What are you actually bouncing back from?
Mm.
And
Mm.
my take on that actually is that when it comes to coping with pain, coping with whatever it is that you're dealing with, and I'm always clear about this. Everyone, and those that are listening to this, um, can actually tune into this as well. Everyone is dealing with something.
Mm.
I'm dealing with my own stuff.
mm,
Everyone's dealing with something. And from my experience, um, I learn vulnerability means learning to sit with that stuff that you're dealing with, wrapping your arms around it in a warm embrace, and walking side by side with it,
mm,
noticing it from a distance. That's what the silence taught
mm,
me, that I can step outside and
mm,
notice my pain, not become my pain, but notice it, and that makes it easier to carry.
mm.
But I don't bounce back from it. I prefer the word perseverance rather than
Aha.
resilience. Because
Mm,
perseverance means you develop a hard nose and you just
mm,
keep on going. You do not give up. Yeah,
mm,
it's constant. Perseverance is
mm,
constantly moving forward. It's not a bounce back from and you're back to the way a ball bounces. Yeah, life isn't that bouncy.
mm. Or linear.
Exactly.
But is it perseverance moving forward but transformed? So it's not the same person moving forward. It's that shifting, changing, you're persevering, you're moving forward, but you're slowly and gently transforming as you're sitting with that challenge on your right hand, on your shoulder, kind of, and you're working together to go, where does this take us? So there is that shifting and changing as well.
You're persevering with the coping.
Mm,
Persevering with the coping. So whatever your coping approach is to dealing with pain, and I call that self-mastery. Whatever
mm,
you're doing to master yourself, whether that's learning to pause, whether that's learning to take a step back,
mm,
whether that's learning to breathe with intention, whether that's becoming more emotionally aware and more emotionally available to yourself,
mm,
whether as a man it's about recognizing that it's okay to be masculine, but it's also okay to be feminine.
mm,
We are a combination. Really, there's no separation between masculine and feminine, really.
mm,
But in a
mm,
society where we like good and bad, black and white, we like to it's a very Aristotelian way of looking at the world, black and white, and even in D&I, we break things up into boxes so that we can understand.
mm,
But actually, life is not like that.
mm,
That's what vulnerability means. Vulnerability
mm,
means being able to see the grey and be comfortable with the grey, because we don't know everything about the grey. There is uncertainty in the grey. Uh,
mm,
there is not knowing what there's the mist in the grey, which is
mm,
the juice of life.
mm.
Vulnerability is being able to sit with that and to persevere with the sitting despite the pain, because that's where the transformation happens.
Mm. You've made me want to ask a very different question, but it relates to something you just said. On International Women's Day one year on IWD, I asked 7 men what they thought about IWD, and most of them said, I don't think I should have an opinion, or I don't have an opinion because this is not about me. And
Yeah.
I found that so fascinating. And what you've just articulated as well goes to this, way that we divide issues into male and female. So, given that this is being talked about as Men's Mental Health Day, and I'm a woman talking about that topic, what do you make of this idea of men's issues, women's issues, and is this maybe the heart of why D&I has gone so awry in some cases?
Yeah,
Should I have an opinion about men's mental health?
of course you should. Absolutely. I wouldn't be here if not for my mother,
Mm,
my beautiful 80. 6-year-old mother. She's 87. I wouldn't be here if not for my mother. And I wouldn't be here if not for my father.
Mm.
And the same with you. Of course, you've got an opinion about men's mental health because we're talking about human health, right?
Yep.
Human health,
Yep.
which of course, rings a bell to you because of the human agency. Yes.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
mm,
That's the heart of the whole conversation, I think, is
human.
if we could peel back to that. So there's this buzzword almost at the moment about being human at work and, being your authentic self. So everything we've just talked about in your research, how well are we doing in Australia, the world 2025, genuinely being human at work, authentic at work, given what we've just shared?
Yeah, and there are pockets, as you know, Katrina, of very good practices in many workplaces where workplaces are doing the best. They're taking steps
Mm,
to allow the human to come out in the workplace. And what does that even mean? Allow the human to come out in the
mm,
workplace. What it simply means is we take steps to lead others to lead from a place of pure and simple humanity,
mm,
lead from a place that goes beyond just use of what I call cognition in the
mm,
workplace to actually using emotion in the workplace,
mm,
leading from a place of emotion in the workplace, and that looks like things like having policies and processes in the workplace that
mm-hmm,
recognize that people go through difficulties in the workplace,
mm,
that we recognize that actually there is a time for stopping and pausing and taking a breath in the workplace. One of the people I interviewed, and they will not mind me saying this, said that when under pressure in the workplace, what she used to do was go into the female bathroom
mm-hmm,
to breathe,
mm,
to find space, to take some breaths, and then come back out energized.
mm,
And that was so poignant. When that comment was made, it made me take a step back, think, oh my goodness, the extent that some people have to take in some of our workplaces to find the
mm,
humanity. They go into the
mm,
toilet to find their humanity. You know.
mm,
So I think that in Australian workplaces and in the, and globally there is a movement, more so since COVID, around emotional well-being.
mm,
There's still space, I would say, for greater connectivity with what it means to be human at work,
mm,
to be less robotic at work, to be less the mouse on the wheel that thinks that if it runs just that bit faster, it just might catch his tail.
mm.
And when it's about to catch his tail, what happens? Boom, it's burnt out. you know.
Yeah. And given your work in OD, which is obviously then lifting up to the organisational level, and everything we've talked about so far is quite at that human level, tell me about the linkage and the alignment from what that leader is experiencing and the culture and the organisation. So are the cultures that the leader creates informed by their degree of emotional cognition?
So that's a great question. I think that organizational development is all about building capability.
Mm,
That's what it's about. Building the
yep.
capability of leaders so that
Mm,
leaders can lead.
mm,
Um, and I remember reading this piece many years ago, which stuck with me. It said the actual work of a manager or leader is the management of staff emotion.
Wow.
That never left me. I read that. The actual work of a leader is the management of employee emotion in a workplace. And it went further to say akin to managing the financial markets. Just similar.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's on nobody's KPI, I don't
That's
think,
why
at the
you don't
moment.
really see
There's
that in
yeah.
anyone's KPI. Absolutely. Um, and so that's returning back to your question.
Mm,
From an organizational development perspective, building the capability of leaders is enabling leaders to understand
mm,
that their role and how they manage really begins with how they manage their own emotions,
mm,
emotional intelligence, how they understand the intelligence in their own emotions, and the affect that
mm,
has through contagion on others.
mm,
And so, whereby leaders become a lot more vulnerable, they can step into themselves
mm.
under their own hood, under their own skin, to understand what's going on within themselves. What happens when they do that is greater connectivity with their staff. They lead others, as you mentioned, not because they intentionally go out to lead others, but they lead others by actually connecting deeper with themselves.
Now that sounds truly vulnerable. The more they do that, the better they'll connect, the better leader they are. Whereas I think most people would feel that's a high risk strategy to be so vulnerable that it could be used against you is what the fear would be. It would evoke fear. But what I've heard you just explain is that link from that very strong understanding of who you are and that pain that walks beside you and how sharing that vulnerability makes you a better leader because you tap into the vulnerability of all the people around you as well and have the ultimate form of human connection.
Now, there's something that comes out of that for the leader, more so. What
Mm.
comes out of that is an awareness
Of who? Of
of
what?
themselves, a greater awareness of who they are,
Mm.
and that gives them greater focus, greater ability to concentrate, and that then feeds out to how they do strategy. It feeds out to how they lead. It feeds out to how they
Mm.
think clearly. That then impacts things like processes and systems, and so it's really a flow out from here that then informs how they do what they do in the workplace.
I don't think anyone is talking about teaching that point that you just said, that it actually leads to greater focus, because I think there's this mythology or social sort of construct that is being vulnerable is sitting in a corner with a box of tissues and sobbing and you're ineffective. So park that for the
Yeah,
weekend.
yeah,
That's stuff that you do after hours. But what you've just shared, which I think is so powerful, is actually the more open and aware you are of all of you, the more focused you can be on the work at hand.
absolutely.
If I've understood that.
That's absolutely correct. It's like, I often describe it like a bottle of Coke. It's not often that we see a
Mm,
bottle of Coke these days, like a glass bottle of Coke, so it's plastic.
yeah.
But if you open up a bottle of Coke and put your finger on it
Mm,
and try and hold your finger down, you can only
mm.
do that for so long.
It's
It comes out, right? And this is the energy of being emotionally and mentally and spiritually aware when we
mm,
step into
mm,
ourselves. The output of that, there is something that comes
mm,
out as a consequence, which is, as we've mentioned, the ability to
mm,
really be more present, to be more focused, to be more aware, and to be able to concentrate. Because the human mind has been
mm,
shown to constantly wander and wander. In fact, there's research that shows that I think it's about 47% of the day of the typical worker in the workplace, they are
mm.
sat where they're sat, but the mind is somewhere else. It's just
Wow.
wandering. wondering,
Yeah.
wondering. And people go, actually, Jude, what if the mind wanders, so what? It's fine. Actually, research shows that it's not fine, because what happens when the mind wanders, I describe it like a hoover. The mind wanders,
Mm,
and when you don't know what the mind is doing, it's hoovering all sorts of stuff up.
mm,
And
mm,
eventually, for example, you feel that you're in a mood. You're not quite sure why you're in
mm,
a mood. Well, what's been happening is that you've hoovered up all this stuff. It's a bit like when you open up
mm.
your vacuum cleaner. It hoovers up stuff, and then when you look at what is hoovered up, it's all this gunk,
Rubbish. Yeah.
rubbish. You look at it, it's all this gunk. It's like, God, this wasn't my carpet. Well, that's what happens when your mind wanders unattended. So this is the
Mm,
power of intentionality. If we can develop this sense of intentional awareness,
mm,
and we know where the mind is going, and we bring it back. This is the self mastery practice that we talk about. You bring it back through the breath. When it wanders, you
mm,
bring it back through the breath, and you have a greater sense of awareness and attention. um, the output of that is concentration, is focus, is the
mm,
ability to connect, is the ability not to be ruffled, to be able to be still amidst the chaos of the
mm,
workplace. You know,
mm,
we don't
mm,
become the mouse on the mouse on the wheel, the fluttering of the heart. You know,
mm, mm,
it's greater, man. It's a different texture of leadership.
mm. Because you and I have talked about the fallacy of putting the suit on and the tie or the high heels and then going into work and pretending that you're in leadership mode and able to switch off the private thoughts. But what I'm hearing you say is you cannot switch them off. So, those inner critical voices, those worries, those concerns, whatever's going on for you, they're in the bottle of Coke, as you said. It's the energy is there. So even if you're pretending really hard that you can ignore them 9 to 5 while you're in the office, that's misleading in and of itself. So you're more powerful if you sit with it and learn to persevere with it, but then you can focus on the work that you're getting done. Is that seems to be the message that we're saying?
That is the message we're saying. What we are also saying is that the more we learn to sit with
Mm,
whatever we're dealing with inside, what that gives us is the ability, and this is really important. It gives us the ability to create space and
mm,
some distance between Jude, who is sat here, and
mm,
what I'm dealing with. So there's
mm,
space,
mm,
and that space is where we can step out of the voice
mm,
to actually see it. So I often say to people that we can learn to switch off the voice in the head
mm,
through sitting, because when we sit with, we can see it better.
mm.
Self-awareness, when we talk about self-awareness, someone often said to me, and when that person asked me that question, initially I didn't understand it, but I now do. He used to say, who is the person that is doing the awareing?
Ah,
When we talk about self-awareness, what is it?
mm,
Like, who is the person that? What is the self that is doing the awareing?
mm,
Because
mm,
what that means is that actually through when we learn to sit, and this is a monastic way of being and doing. When we learn to sit, we get in touch with the purity of ourselves, such that we can see that which is not
mm,
ourselves, the voice in the head, the turbulence of the
mm.
emotions. Does that make sense?
It does. So if you were going to put that into a practical tip for someone who's listening, who works in a high stress environment, so they're listening, they go, this all makes calm and logical sense, Jude, but my job is full on.
Yeah.
What is one small habit that they could implement, anybody could implement, to
Yes.
bring that sense of calm or grounding
Yeah.
in a high stress environment, to begin the practice of of doing that.
Yeah, yeah. And as you were asking me that question, I went straight, and you and I can do this together. We can do it
Mm,
right here as we're speaking. I went
mm,
straight to feeling right now the soles of your feet.
mm,
You know, if as we're speaking now, you can pay attention, like you never have before, Katrina,
mm,
to
mm,
how the soles of your feet are currently placed in the shoes that you're wearing or on the carpet. Just noticing the
mm,
texture of the soles of your feet on the carpet for a second. And as you do that, as you pay attention to that, you might also begin to notice that there's some sensations around the soles of your feet.
mm,
Um, and as you keep on paying attention to the soles of your feet as they are sat against the floor, you become aware that there is a gentle calmness that begins to arise just by intentionally paying attention to the soles of your feet.
mm.
Um, so this is a gentle one of the first practices that I ever learned. Paying attention to the soles of your feet, and by doing that, you become more aware of your breathing, for example.
Mm,
You become less in your head, and you're coming
mm.
more into your body because the fretting and the pacing is in the head.
Ah,
It's not in the body.
mm.
The body acts as an antidote to the mind by paying attention
Wow.
to the body.
Mm,
And you can see that even as we're speaking here, actually we are I'm speaking to you and I'm really paying attention to the soles of my feet,
mm,
and I can feel myself, I can feel sensations around my body a bit more.
mm.
Do you feel anything?
Absolutely. I want to take my shoes off, but but also I think you said the words fretting and pacing. This is a much nicer practice to do if you are still. And so even whether you were standing or sitting, it would force you to not pace. And if you're a person who's charging around, not only has it calmed, focused your mind, but it's focused your body as well into a moment of stillness. So yeah, very powerful.
And this stillness that you are referring to is a stillness that has never left me despite leaving the monastery. This is taking us to the start of this conversation. That you
Mm,
can be still in the workplace. And anyone that is listening, let them listen to this message, that you can find stillness, just like my colleague went to the toilets to find stillness.
mm,
You
mm,
can find stillness, Mr. and Mrs. Leader in the organization that we're speaking to
mm,
right now, by paying attention to the soles of your feet. It's a very subtle practice. Actually, it might even sound stupid. Let me just say to everyone, transformation happens in the stupid. That's where it happens. So, but the more we practice this, um, and persevere with it. So here comes that word that we spoke about, right?
mm, mm,
Persevere with the practice of actually paying attention to your big toe, to the soles of feet on the ground, and noticing the subtle movement or out of the head into the body. There's a
mm,
calmness that arises, and where we can operate from there in what we do in the workplace, it's a different type of leadership that
mm.
arises.
Absolutely. It's the perfect way to wrap up because we're going to leave everybody with this sense of groundedness and calmness. But I like to ask one last question, which is imagine a billboard, a bit like the Coca-Cola sign that's so famous in Sydney. So if you could put one message on there about leadership and humanity
Yes.
that every leader in Australia needs to read, what would it say?
Ah, it says leadership starts first and foremost with learning to lead yourself.
Mm.
That's where it starts.
I love the full circle that that story has taken us on from Nigeria, well, London to Nigeria, and to our billboard. And I think everything really like flows and connects together. I think there's so much in there for people to take away. And I thank you for sharing that with us. I can't wait to read your research and meet these leaders that you interviewed. I want to hear their stories or read their stories. I think there's going to be so much richness in what you bring to the understanding of leadership and transformation in Australia.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for the work that you do, the amazing work that you do as part of the human agency, and for the opportunity to have this conversation together. Thank you for having me on your podcast today.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you next time.